We're going to take this design and make it come to life. This is part 1 of the deeper dive series, starting with the top. I'm making the top out of poplar. I purchased 8-foot boards at my hardware store. Now I'm making it out of poplar because I'm on a budget here. This desk is going to get a little expensive by the time I buy the frame, add the lights, and all of the epoxy that's going to go into it. We're going to start off by gluing up these boards, clamping them together, and letting it dry. I'm not too worried about matching the ends in terms of length up to each other perfectly because I plan on cutting this board on each of the sides. That way I have clean, crisp edges because I don't need 8 foot. In fact, I can't fit an 8-foot top. What I am concerned about is the flatness or a level plane from one board to the other. I'm using 2x4s, 2x3s, and clamps to try to get the boards to be flat. If I have any high points or low points, I will have to remove that using sanders. And if I can avoid it, I'm going to try. So you'll see me clamp some edges as well as put some weight in the middle and try to clamp that down. I did the best I could with what clamps and jigs that I have. Now just let it dry. And thankfully this is YouTube and you don't have to wait for it to dry. You can now watch me sand for 30 minutes. Just kidding. I'm only going to show you a small clip of sanding, but please make sure that you go through the different grits and you sand and wipe off in between for a nice smooth finish. Now I'm determining how much I want to cut from each end to get me my final top dimensions. Once I have the marks made, I use a drywall square and draw straight lines across. I'm also drawing a line for my Bora edge clamp. I'm going to use a circular saw and it offsets 1 1/8 inch. So I'm setting my Bora clamp 1 1/8 inch away from my line, and then I will take my circular saw and run it along the edge. This will give me a nice straight line because there's no way I could do that by hand and cut it that straight. And repeat this on the other side. Now it's time for the fun part. We're going to take this desktop and we're going to separate it into 2 pieces, our outside edge and our inside desk. From the outside edge, I'm measuring in 3 inches all the way around. Then I'm measuring a 2-inch groove from there. We are going to cut out that 2-inch material, and that is where we're going to pour our epoxy. Using this drywall T-square, which is 2 inches thick, allows me to easily draw the inside and outside lines. I also use my speed square to get my corners lined up. Once we get this all drawn out throughout the entire desk, we will then remove the material, and it will eventually be replaced with epoxy and lights. To help me out with this next part, I'm going to be using the Craig 24-inch rib cut aluminum circular saw guide. I did a video on this earlier. You can find the link in the description below. But it's a great way to help you cut straight lines, especially when you have an edge to use as a reference. Just set it on the dimension that you need and insert your circular saw. Since I'm not cutting from an edge, I'm starting with the saw up, starting the saw, and then slowly lowering it where I want it to cut. Once I'm flat against the surface, then I start going forward. Here's another look at that. Starting up high, slowly lowering the saw blade down until I'm flat, and then I'm moving the saw along with the guide. You may notice that I'm not cutting all the way to the line. I didn't want the circular saw to accidentally take too much out since the blade is kind of angled in. I will follow up with a handsaw. You can either use one of those cool Japanese pull saws, or if you just have a regular handsaw in your shop, that will work just fine. Just be careful when you get to the edges that you're not too aggressive, because you could snap some boards, so just be careful. To cut out my letters for my words, I'm using Rockler's signage kit. The font style I'm using is Comic Sans. Along with the signage kit, you're going to need this brass fitting and router bit that fits into your router plate, and that keeps you inside of the stencil. Once you have your letters put together to form your words, you're going to want to add some extra spacers on the sides. In fact, I even added 2 more than what you're seeing here, and I used that surface to clamp. That way my router can move freely. I'm just lining up where I want the stencil to be so I can easily clamp it down and make sure that it's straight. When it's time to router, you want to gently place the router bit down inside of your letters. I get low to the same level as the router bit, and I kind of tilt it down just to ensure that bit is not cutting into the plastic, but cutting into the letters. If you have a plunge kit, that might be better because you can eyeball where it is and then plunge down. My end goal is to remove the letter completely from the wood. But when you're starting out with this router, you don't want your depth to go all the way through the wood. You want to take multiple passes, lowering the router bit each time. So I'm going to cut the achieve once at a shallower depth, lower the bit, cut it again, and last I will cut out the final one. When I do that, I place a board underneath to help reduce tear out and to make sure that I'm cutting all the way through. In addition to cutting out letters, I want to cut out grooves to place these coasters into my desk, so it'll be forever a part of it. To help me cut this out with the router, I'm using this scrap piece of maple plywood. I believe it's 1/4 inch, and I'm going to trace out this coaster on it. To start, I'm going to drill a hole in the corner. This is going to allow me to insert my jigsaw blade and cut out the design. I'm using the Ryobi brushless cordless jigsaw. Once I had the inner square cut out, I then went back through with the jigsaw and cut a little bit closer to the line. It's a little bit easier to do it that way when you're not fighting a piece in the middle. I place my template on my desk, matching up the lines. The next thing I need to do is determine how deep I need the router to go into the wood. So first I place another material of the template on there and then the coaster. Because the router will be resting on the template, I need to make sure I count for that in the depth. When cutting out this piece, you can pretty much start your router anywhere in the middle and not have to worry about running into the stencil, and then work your way to your template edge and just follow it around. Now you will have to vacuum in between passes to clear the material and see what you can get. Until your section is cut out as nice as this, then do a little test fit. You may have to place the coaster in, find out where you're a little tight, and cut out more material. So do your test. And then after I found the right fit, I did take some sandpaper and kind of sand the edges and smooth it out so it sat a little bit better. I repeated this step on the other side because there were 2 coasters that I wanted to place inside of this table. I also finished out the cutting of each of the words. It was basically the same process for achieve. I cut out believe and dream. One thing that I did was after I cut out the letters, because the router had some rough edges or because I was taking multiple passes, I could see some grooves inside of there. I folded up some sandpaper and tried to run it through each and every single groove in the letters There were some stencils that were used prior that had some nicks taken out and that did impact my letters on this project, so I tried my best to smooth them out as best as I could. Transitioning to the outside piece, I have my round over router bit in my trim router, and we're going to cut down that outside edge. By rounding it over, it's also going to allow the epoxy to go over the edge and cover the top of the desk. I'm also going to sand the outside piece, going through the different grits and making sure to vacuum in between. Here is the finished internal piece of the desk. Remember, we still have that outer piece. In the next video, step 2, we're going to combine the outer and the inner piece in a mold and pour our epoxy. So stay tuned for the next video.